Alien girl of high rank asked the human for a simple favor, but his answer shifted her world. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The airlock groaned as Ethan Cole slid through the narrow passage, boots scraping against the cold metal. Frost clung to the outer wall panels, the kind that formed when the thermal regulators decided to act up again, usually during his shift. His breath came out in soft white puffs, fading into the dim blue glow of the maintenance bay. Static hummed inside his helmet as he clipped his tether to the railing. Beyond the glass, the planet Releth rotated in slow, muted colors, its lavender storms swirling like they were stirring secrets centuries older than humanity. Ethan wiped his gloves on his suit, trying to warm his fingertips through the fabric. Long day, longer night. He had one last inspection left on his checklist when a soft tone chimed in his earpiece. Priority signal. Highborn approach. He blinked. Highborn. Here? On deck C? That never happened. Ethan stepped inside just as the inner door slid open with a crisp hiss. Lights spilled into the corridor like liquid silver. And then she stepped out, Lady Arinya Voss. Taller than him by at least half a head, luminous markings threading faintly along her cheekbones, eyes a deep violet that seemed to hold a sky of their own. Her presence felt like a drop in air pressure, quiet but commanding. Ethan stiffened, though he wasn't sure why. He'd seen dignitaries before, but something about her made him suddenly aware of the grime on his gloves and the tiny scorch mark on his sleeve. Human engineer, she said, her voice soft but sculpted with an old-world authority. I require a favor. Just 6 words, but they hung between them with a weight he didn't quite understand. Her hands were clasped around a small object, a polished metallic cube no larger than his palm. She held it carefully, almost reverently. Ethan offered a polite nod. What do you need? Arinya hesitated, and that alone surprised him. Highborns didn't hesitate. Not with humans. Not with anyone. This device, it is damaged, she said quietly. I was told you are the one who repairs things others call unsalvageable. Ethan frowned softly, taking the cube from her. It was warm, faintly humming. It seems lined with an intricate pattern unlike any human design. Something personal. Something old. He turned it over gently in his hands. I can try, he said. But if it's as delicate as it looks, I can't promise it'll be quick. Or perfect. Her eyes widened a fraction, as if she hadn't expected honesty. Or choice. You would refuse if it risked damage? He nodded. If it matters to you, I won't pretend I can fix it in minutes just to impress someone. For a moment, the corridor seemed to still. No hum of vents. No click of cooling metal. Just the quiet between them. Arinya inhaled slowly, as if rediscovering the feel of air. No one has ever answered a highborn in such a way, she murmured. Not on this station. Not anywhere. Ethan shrugged lightly, returning the cube with both hands. Maybe they should. And for the first time, just barely, her expression changed. The faintest shift, like a curtain lifting, letting a sliver of humanity slip through. The favor had been simple, but the answer, something in her world, had already moved. The metallic cube felt heavier in Ethan's hands than its size should allow, as if it carried a quiet pressure of its own. He watched Arinya for a moment, noting how her posture remained perfectly poised, yet something in her shoulders had softened since he returned the device. The station lights flickered gently above them, casting faint shifting reflections across the silver trim of her attire. She followed him into the maintenance alcove, a compact space filled with tool drawers, scattered cables, and the comforting hum of diagnostic screens. The brightness of her presence made everything else look worn and small, like she had stepped into a theater prop room instead of a working bay. You may set it there, she said softly, but without command. Ethan placed the cube on a padded tray and adjusted the scanning arm above it. The device emitted a faint harmonic tone, pleasantly warm, almost like it was breathing. Arinya stood close enough that he could sense the faint temperature difference radiating from her, cool and calm, like standing near running water. He tried not to think about how unusual it was for someone of her status to be in a lower-deck engineering bay. Most highborn do not visit maintenance sectors, she remarked, as if reading his thoughts. It is not prohibited. It is simply unexpected. Ethan grinned slightly as he activated the first scan. I could say the same. Most highborn do not ask humans for favors. She tilted her head, studying him with that steady violet gaze. Do you believe it was truly a favor? Seemed like one to me. Ethan replied. You asked. I answered. She paused at that, as if turning the words over carefully. The cube's projection flickered to life on the nearby screen, showing a lattice of intricate pathways, delicate enough that even a minor jolt could realign them. Ethan whistled softly. This is old. Really old. It is from my family's first era, she said. A time before we charted our modern star routes. It contains the voice of my ancestor. Her teachings shaped our traditions. Ethan felt the words settle. So it was not just a keepsake. It was a link to someone she respected. Someone she wished not to lose. No pressure, he muttered under his breath, adjusting the calibrator. Arinya's eyes softened, the faintest hint of amusement breaking through her careful composure. You carry pressure better than you believe, Ethan Cole. He blinked up at her. How do you know my name? It is my responsibility to know the personnel aboard any station I visit. Her tone was matter of fact, but something in it sounded almost gentle. I expected a technician, she continued. But I did not expect someone who speaks honestly without attempting to impress. Ethan focused on the cube to steady himself. Honesty is easier than pretending. Not for everyone, she said quietly. The scan chimed. Ethan leaned closer, viewing the results. Good news. The memory core is intact. I just need to recalibrate a failing interface. It may take a few hours. I will wait, she said immediately. Ethan laughed under his breath. You do not have to stay here. It is not exactly a luxury suite. I prefer to remain. The way she said it, not as a command, not as a request, but as a choice, made him glance up. Arinya stood with her hands folded lightly, calm as starlight, patient in a way that surprised him. Highborn never waited. Highborn were the ones people waited for. And yet she stayed. That, more than anything, told Ethan that something had already begun to shift inside her long before the cube was ever placed in his hands. The maintenance base settled into a quiet rhythm, the kind that made every small sound feel larger. The gentle hum of the diagnostic arm, the soft vibration under Ethan's boots, even the faint tap of Arinya's breathing against the cold air blended into a steady pulse. Ethan adjusted the cube's interface, watching thin bands of light ripple across its surface like slow-moving water. It is responding, he murmured, leaning closer, careful not to disturb its alignment. Arinya stood a short distance behind him, her reflection faint in the polished metal wall. The shift in her posture was subtle, but he noticed the way her hands had relaxed at her sides, no longer clasped in that formal highborn manner. You work with focus, she said softly. It is uncommon. Ethan gave a small smile without taking his eyes off the cube. When the equipment is older than my entire species, I tend to pay attention. She stepped closer, the faintest breeze following her movement as her robes brushed lightly against the floor. Older than your species, she repeated. It is remarkable, is it not? How quickly your kind adapts. You exceed expectations even when others doubt you. Ethan shrugged gently. Tools are tools. Problems are problems. Someone has to fix things. She studied him with a quiet intensity, as if trying to understand a language that was not spoken but lived. In my world, she said, very few choose such tasks unless required. Making things whole again is not considered a noble duty. Maybe it should be, he replied. Arinya grew still, her gaze drifting to the cube as Ethan began reconnecting the final filament. The moment stretched in a delicate balance. The cube glowed faintly, threads of soft gold forming within the interior, as if waking from a long rest. But before Ethan could continue, a gentle tremor passed through the bay. A shift in pressure. A subtle fluctuation of the overhead lights. The station cleared its throat in the way old orbital habitats sometimes did. Ethan steadied the cube with both hands. As it hummed in response, stabilizing the light within, Arinya looked toward the ceiling, concern flickering in her eyes. Is the station secure? It is just a recalibration cycle, Ethan assured her. Nothing dangerous. The station does this sometimes when the thermal plates adjust. She seemed relieved, though her posture remained attentive. Your calmness is unexpected, she admitted. When most people stand in the presence of a highborn, they choose their words with care. You do not. Ethan chuckled softly, adjusting the final connector. If I started talking fancy, I would only confuse myself. Arinya blinked once, as if processing that. Then, for the first time, her lips curved into a faint, unguarded smile. Not a ceremonial gesture. Not a diplomatic courtesy. Something real. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest that did not come from the equipment. The cube chimed suddenly, its glow intensifying. Ethan stepped back slightly as the filaments inside aligned, locking into place with a soft click. There, he said. Your memory device is stable. It should open when you touch the central seal. Arinya approached the tray, slower than before. Reverent. She extended a hand, hovering her fingers inches above the cube, as if uncertain whether she was prepared for what it might reveal. Before I open it, she whispered, may I ask you something? Ethan nodded, waiting. She met his gaze, her eyes calm but searching. Why did you treat me as if I were simply a person? Ethan held her gaze, steady and sincere. Because you are. And for a moment, the entire station felt quiet enough to hear her heart shift. The memory cube rested between Arinya's hands, its soft gold glow pulsing like a heartbeat captured in metal. Ethan watched her hesitate, the faint tremor in her fingers barely visible but unmistakable to someone standing this close. She took a slow breath, steadying herself, and touched the central seal. A warm ripple of light expanded across the cube, blooming into a soft projection. A figure emerged, not fully solid, shaped from delicate strands of luminous energy. The voice that followed was gentle, layered with an old cadence, like someone who had lived long enough to understand the weight of silence. Arinya's eyes widened. Ethan could sense the shift in her even before she spoke. This is her, she whispered. My ancestor, Lady Silari Voss. The projection recited something in her native language, the syllables flowing like water, steady and calm. Ethan did not understand a single word, yet he felt the tone of it settle warmly in the air around them. Arinya lowered her head slightly, absorbing every note. When the recording faded, she exhaled, the moment leaving a softness across her features that he had not seen before. Thank you, she said quietly. You restored something precious to me. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. It was your cube. I just fixed a few connections. You did more than that, she replied. You gave back a voice that shaped generations. She stepped closer, her expression thoughtful. Human engineers often consider themselves small pieces of a larger system. Yet you repair things others would abandon. Ethan shrugged a little, not out of rudeness but humility. Everything breaks eventually. That does not mean it should be thrown away. She looked at him with an expression he had not expected, admiration. But before Ethan could respond, the lights overhead flickered again. A soft alert tone sounded in the distance. It was not alarming, but noticeable. Ethan glanced at the ceiling. Thermal plates again. They like to pick the most dramatic moments. Arinya's gaze followed his. Is this station always so unpredictable? Only when it feels like getting my attention, Ethan said, trying to lighten the tension. She let out a quiet laugh, the sound soft and surprised, as if it had escaped without her permission. She placed the cube back on the tray for a moment and folded her hands gently. Ethan Cole, she said, I wish to ask something else of you. He looked up. Sure. What do you need? Walk with me, she said simply. He blinked. You mean around the station? Yes. Her tone held no command this time, only intent. I have visited dozens of human stations. They show me grand halls, diplomatic decks, curated displays. But they never show me what life is actually like for the people who keep these places alive. Ethan hesitated. It was unusual. Highborn did not stroll through lower decks by choice. They arrived with escorts, with protocols, with distance. Are you sure? He asked. These hallways are not polished. The lights are dim. Some panels creak. And the place smells like coolant half the time. Arinya gave him a steady look. That is precisely why I want to see it. The cube glowed faintly beside them, as if echoing her resolve. Ethan wiped his gloves on his suit and stepped out of the alcove. She followed, her robes whispering over the metal flooring, her presence now less like a distant dignitary and more like someone choosing to walk a path she had never considered before. They moved together into the corridor, side by side. the hum of the station wrapping around them like a quiet secret waiting to be shared. The corridor stretched ahead in a long ribbon of dim light, the overhead panels humming with the familiar uneven pulse Ethan had grown used to. Arinya walked beside him, her steps measured, her gaze drifting over every detail as if she were seeing a world previously hidden. The lower decks were quiet at this hour, only the soft rumble of ventilation ducts and the distant whir of recycling units breaking the silence. Ethan tucked his hands behind his back, partly out of habit, partly because he did not quite know where to put them while walking next to someone whose presence felt like standing beside a calm star. This area maintains oxygen regulation for the crew quarters, he explained, nodding toward a set of steel doors. Not much to look at, but it keeps everyone breathing. Arinya paused to study the small panel on the door, the faint scratches around the keypad, the way the numbers had been worn down by years of human use. Your people build things with practicality in mind, she said. Not beauty, but purpose. Function first, Ethan replied. Beauty is what we add when everything else stops leaking. She smiled lightly, the kind of smile that seemed to bloom from thought rather than humor. They continued forward, passing a cluster of storage crates stacked unevenly against the wall. Arinya brushed her hand across one of them, tracing the rough texture of the metal. It is remarkable, she murmured. The places diplomats show me are always polished and immaculate. But this feels real. Ethan slowed his steps. Most of the important work happens in places like this. The things nobody sees. She considered that. And yet without these people, these halls, these tools, your station would not function. That is right. Arinya's voice softened. In my society, work done far from the public eye is often undervalued. Those who maintain stability are rarely honored. Ethan tapped the wall lightly with his knuckle. Maybe honor is overrated. I will take quiet usefulness any day. Arinya looked at him with an expression he could not quite decipher. Thoughtful, gentle, maybe even curious. They reached a wide observation port overlooking the curve of the planet below. From here, Reletha's lavender storms swirled like slow-moving paint across an enormous canvas. The light reflected softly on Arinya's skin, giving her an otherworldly glow. She stepped closer to the window, hands clasped behind her. Your world has a way of making even silence feel full, she said. Ethan stood beside her, watching the clouds shift. Sometimes the quiet is all we get. Might as well make it count. The hum of the station faded into the background. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Arinya's gaze stayed fixed on the storms, her eyes reflecting the gentle motion. Ethan, she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. May I ask you something personal? Sure, he replied, keeping his tone calm. Ask anything. She hesitated, her breath catching slightly. Why did you decide to work here? On a remote research station, far from your homeworld. Ethan rubbed the edge of his sleeve, thinking. Because someone has to keep this place running. And because out here, things feel quieter, clearer. You can fix something with your hands and know it mattered. Arinya studied him with an intensity that made the air feel warmer. My people rarely pursue clarity, she said. We pursue expectation. Ethan met her eyes. Maybe you deserve more than that. The words hung there, soft but steady, like a pulse she had never felt before. She turned back to the window, drawing a slow breath. Perhaps, she whispered. For the first time, I am beginning to wonder. The storms below illuminated the quiet between them, and in that stillness, something unspoken shifted, gentle as gravity and just as real. The corridor lights dimmed slightly as the station shifted into its late cycle, the kind of gentle transition that made everything feel slower and more intimate. Ethan and Arinya continued walking, their reflections gliding along the polished glass of the observation port behind them. The hum of distant engines created a low, steady heartbeat that filled the quiet. Arinya's steps grew more thoughtful, her gaze tracking the details humans would normally ignore, the worn labels on the wall panels, the handprints faintly visible on railings, the tiny maintenance stickers that marked each repair Ethan had made. Your people leave traces of themselves everywhere, she said softly. Not intentionally, but in a way that tells stories without words. Ethan chuckled. We are messy like that. We leave fingerprints on things. Footprints. Imperfections. Imperfections, she repeated, as though tasting the word. My society values flawlessness. Everything must be precise. That is a lot of pressure, Ethan replied. I think a little imperfection keeps things honest. Arinya looked at him, her expression calm but searching. Does honesty come naturally to humans? Not always, he said. But we try. They passed a junction where a soft stream of warm air drifted from an open vent. Arinya paused, holding her hand near the gentle current, letting it brush against her skin. This warmth, she murmured. It feels welcoming. Ethan leaned lightly against the railing nearby. It means the environmental systems are doing their job. That vent is connected to the crew quarters. Keeps the temperature stable when people sleep. Her eyes lifted toward him. Do you sleep well here? Ethan considered the question. Some nights. Some nights the alarms go off, or an interface glitches. But most nights, yes. She stepped closer, her voice quiet. Do you not miss your home world? I do, Ethan admitted. But out here, things are simpler. I know what is expected. I know what is needed of me. Arinya looked down the hallway, her gaze distant. Simplicity is a luxury in my position. Expectations are heavy. Every decision echoes. Ethan studied her expression, noticing the faint tension behind her composed exterior. Can I ask you something? She turned to him. Yes. If your expectations are so heavy, he asked gently, then what do you actually want? Not what they expect. What you want. She inhaled, the breath slow and deliberate, as if the question pressed against something deep inside her. I do not know, she said finally. I was taught purpose before choice. I was taught duty before desire. She looked toward the planet again, the lavender storms reflecting in her eyes. When I watched my ancestors' message, I felt something I had not felt in many cycles. As if I were allowed to wonder again. Ethan nodded. Wonder is good. It means you are still growing. She faced him fully now, her presence steady, her voice quiet. But direct. Ethan Cole, why do you treat me as someone who is allowed to wonder? Because you are, he answered. Everyone is. She held his gaze, her violet eyes calm, yet full of something shifting, something unspoken. In my culture, she said, questions are reserved for those who seek knowledge. But wondering, that is reserved for those who seek themselves. Ethan felt the station hum beneath them like a slow breath. Then maybe this is your time to figure out who you are. Not as a highborn, just as Arinya. Her name lingered gently in the air, softer than the hum of the engines. She drew a slow breath, almost fragile in its honesty. Ethan, she whispered, what if I do not yet know how to be that person? Then we start with small steps, he said, like walking down a quiet hallway. She looked around, then back at him, and for the first time her expression held something almost human, uncertainty and hope woven gently together. Then may I take another step? She asked. Ethan smiled. Anywhere you want. And she did, moving forward beside him as though the simple act of choosing where to walk was the most freeing thing she had done in her life. The late cycle lights glowed in soft amber as Ethan and Arinya reached one of the quieter service corridors, a place where the station's systems could be heard more clearly than its inhabitants. The steady hum of power conduits vibrated through the floor, a grounding rhythm that Ethan had always found oddly comforting. Arinya slowed her pace, her expression shifting as though she sensed something subtle changing in the air. This hallway, she said, brushing her fingers along the wall. It feels different. Ethan listened for what she meant. A faint irregular clicking pulsed behind the panels, almost like a heartbeat that had lost its timing. His eyebrows lifted. That is not normal. He crouched near a maintenance grid and pressed his hand against it, feeling the temperature. Warmer than it should have been. Is it dangerous? Arinya asked, her voice calm but alert. Not dangerous, Ethan replied. But it could get messy if I do not fix it. He glanced up at her. Stay close. The system might need a manual reset. She nodded without hesitation, showing none of the distance or ceremony he had expected from someone of her rank. Ethan opened the grid with a quiet hiss, revealing a narrow compartment filled with shimmering cables and softly glowing nodes. A soft plume of warm air drifted out, brushing gently across their faces. Arinya knelt beside him, the movement careful and deliberate. What causes this? She asked. A thermal imbalance, Ethan said. One of the coolant lines is struggling to regulate the heat load. I just need to reroute the flow. As he reached inside, the compartment buzzed faintly, enough to nudge his hand back. All right, he murmured. We are doing this the old way. Arinya watched, her eyes following every motion of his hands. You place yourself at risk for a machine. It is not about the machine, Ethan said, adjusting a thin connector with slow precision. It is about the people relying on it. Her eyes softened. Your sense of duty is pure. Ethan paused at her words, surprised by their gentleness. Maybe. Or maybe I just do not want anyone waking up to cold air. Arinya held his gaze, understanding more in that moment than any formal briefing could have taught her. He refocused on the panel, locating a tiny manual bypass. It clicked softly when he turned it. The warm air faded. The hum steadied. The irregular clicking slowed, then stopped entirely. There it is, Ethan said, letting out a small breath. All fixed. Arinya exhaled as if releasing tension she had not realized she carried. You repaired it with your hands, she said quietly. Not with commands. Not with drones. Just your own skill. Ethan shrugged gently. Sometimes you have to feel the problem. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression open in a way that felt fragile. Ethan Cole, she said softly. My people solve problems with authority. You solve them with care. That is why I asked to walk with you. Ethan stood, offering her a hand without thinking. She accepted it, her hand cool and steady in his. When she rose, she did not let go immediately. She looked down the long corridor they had walked together, the dim lights reflecting like distant stars along the floor. I understand now, she whispered. It is not the station that feels different. It is me. Her fingers released his slowly, gently, as if choosing the moment mattered. And in the quiet that followed, the station hummed like it agreed. The station's late cycle settled into a soft quiet, the kind that made every echo feel gentle instead of empty. Ethan and Arinya continued down the corridor, their steps falling into an easy rhythm that neither of them had to think about. The warm air from the repaired conduit drifted behind them like a fading whisper. Arinya moved with a calm Ethan had not seen before. Not regal, not formal, just present. She paused near a small viewport overlooking a maintenance dock where a pair of unmanned drones rested on their charging rails. Their metal frames gleamed faintly beneath the soft blue lights. These machines, she said, tilting her head. They work continuously, do they not? Pretty much, Ethan replied. They do the heavy lifting. Bolt tightening. Bulk cargo hauling. The things humans should not risk. Arinya watched the drones quietly. In my world, tasks like these are assigned to lower castes. They are not dangerous, but they are disregarded. Ethan leaned against the edge of the viewport. Every job matters, even the small ones. She turned to him, her expression gentle. Your perspective shifts things. He smiled. Maybe things were ready to shift. Her gaze lingered on him before drifting back to the drones. A soft vibration pulsed through the floor, the station adjusting to a minor orbit correction. Arinya steadied herself with a hand on the railing, her robe brushing lightly against the floor. Ethan instinctively steadied the railing near her, not touching her, just making sure she had balance. She noticed. Her eyes softened. You are aware of others, she said quietly, even in subtle ways. Force of habit, he said. People do better when someone is paying attention. Arinya took a slow breath, as though letting that truth sink deeper than she expected. I would like to ask you something, she said. Ethan nodded. Go ahead. Earlier, she began, when you repaired the coolant line, you said you did it for the people who rely on the system. That is right. And you did not consider what it might mean for your reputation, or if someone would notice. Ethan shrugged. Most good work goes unnoticed. That does not make it less good. Arinya stepped closer, her voice soft. In my society, everything is noticed. Every action is weighed against expectation. I do not know what it feels like to act without a shadow watching. Ethan met her eyes. Maybe you are feeling it now. Her breath caught slightly, a quiet shift of air. Perhaps I am. They continued walking until they reached an unused observation alcove, a small curved room with a half-dome window that looked out into deep space. No planets, no storms, just stars. Thousands of them, scattered across the dark like distant lanterns. Arinya stepped toward the window, her silhouette outlined in soft starlight. In all my journeys, she whispered, I have never stood in a place this quiet. Ethan stood beside her, letting the silence speak. The stars reflected in her eyes, tiny fragments of light drifting across violet. Ethan Cole, she said softly. May I tell you something without the weight of my rank? Always, he said, her voice lowered to a careful, fragile honesty. Tonight, when you repaired the device for me, it was the first time someone acted on my behalf without obligation. You did not do it to gain favor. You did not do it for political advantage. You did it because you cared. Ethan breathed in slow, steady. I fixed it because it mattered to you. That was enough. She turned to him fully now, the stars resting in her expression like something reborn. Then my world has already changed, she said. And I am only beginning to understand how. For a long moment, they stood in the quiet glow of the cosmos, the station humming softly around them as if giving them space to breathe. No protocol, no titles, just two people, standing beneath the same distant lights. The stars hung outside the observation alcove like frozen sparks, scattered across the deep quiet of space. Ethan stood beside Arinya without speaking, letting the silence stretch just long enough to feel true. The hum of the station wrapped around them in a low, steady vibration, soft enough to fade beneath the weight of the moment. Arinya's reflection hovered faintly on the curved glass, her violet eyes softened by the starlight. She exhaled slowly, the kind of breath someone releases when choosing honesty over expectation. Ethan, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. There is something I must tell you before my people arrive for me. His shoulders tensed slightly. You are leaving soon? My escort will dock within the hour. Her fingers touched the window, tracing the faint glow of a constellation. They will expect me to return to my duties, to slip back into a role that no longer fits as it once did. Ethan nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. I figured this was temporary. Arinya turned toward him, her expression steady and open. This was more than temporary. It was awakening. She stepped closer, close enough that the warmth of her presence brushed against him through the cool air. Ethan Cole, I must admit something that my rank forbids me to express. He swallowed lightly. I am listening. In the time I have walked with you, she said softly, I learned more about myself than I have in many cycles. You treated me not as royalty, not as expectation, but as a person capable of choosing her own steps. And I do not wish to return to who I was before that. Ethan felt the words land somewhere deep, warm, and unexpectedly heavy. You do not have to become someone you are not, he said quietly. You get to decide the rest. She looked down, her voice trembling with a new kind of vulnerability. But the truth is, I do not know how to walk forward without guidance. Ethan hesitated, then reached out slowly, carefully, offering his hand without touching her. A choice, not a gesture. Then walk forward the same way we fixed your cube, he said. One connection at a time. Arinya's eyes lifted to his hand. For a moment, she did not move. Then she placed her palm gently against his, her touch cool and steady, her breath catching in a quiet gasp of resolution. A soft tone echoed through the corridor, the docking alert. Her escort had arrived. The sound settled between them like a final page turning. Arinya released his hand slowly, but not abruptly, letting the moment linger before stepping back. I must go, she said. If I do not return, they will come searching. Ethan nodded. I know. She paused at the alcove entrance, her silhouette framed by soft gold lights. Ethan Cole, she said, her voice softer than the station's hum. When I speak to my people of Earth, I will speak of what I found here. And what is that? He asked. She held his gaze, her expression calm and full of quiet meaning. Humanity, she whispered. The kind that cannot be taught. The doors slid open, casting a wider glow over the corridor. Arinya stepped through, her posture regal yet transformed, as if carrying a new truth beneath every motion. Before the doors closed, she looked back one last time, offering him a small, steady smile that did not need words. The doors shut with a gentle hiss, leaving Ethan alone in the alcove with only the stars and the lingering warmth of her presence. He stood there for a long moment, watching the space she had left behind, feeling the silence settle around him like a quiet promise. And as the station hummed softly beneath his feet, he whispered to the empty hallway, Safe travels, Arinya. No answer came. Only the distant glow of starlight reflected on the glass, shimmering like the memory of someone who had learned how to choose her own steps.